Though the year has been filled with news that captivated us all over the past 2 weeks, the news cycle has been nothing short of explosive, with headline after headline capturing national and even international attention. From the U.S. indictment naming multiple Bahamians, including high-ranking officers and allegedly politicians, to the shocking demonstration in the House of Assembly where the ceremonial mace was thrown out of the window, and the Commissioner of Police resigning amidst mounting suspicions of corruption. It's been a whirlwind like no other. Tonight we close out what has already been an unforgettable year with our Year in Review Roundtable, a tradition where we reflect on the stories that have shaped our nation and the way we tell them. So stay tuned as we get started on the other side of this break.
Well, isn't that nice? Looks like Santa really appreciates the fact that we bring you the stories that matter to you every day. Happy holidays from the team you already trust.
Merry Christmas and Happy New Year from all of us here at RTV.
America's 47th President Donald J. Trump takes office on January 20th. With a decisive victory and clear mandate from the American people, what will his anticipated policy changes in immigration, taxation, climate change, foreign policy, and social reconstruction mean for the Bahamas and the region? Join On the Record with me, Jerome Sawyer, Thursday, January 23rd at 8 p.m. from the nation's capital for a special Mission to Washington. To kick off tonight's Year in Review Roundtable, we're joined by two exceptional journalists who bring invaluable insight and expertise to our discussion. Jasmine Brown, the assignment editor here at Our News, and Rashad, Rolle, news editor at the Tribune. Folks, welcome to our Year in Review final show for the year.
Thanks for having us again.
Yeah, our final show. All right, so let's talk pretty much broadly. Rashad, I'll begin with you. How would you rate the government's performance overall this year?
I think in some ways the proof is in the pudding, in the sense that generally speaking we believe that this is an administration, the Davis administrations, that still has a degree of public support. Usually at this point in an administration we could tell that the tide has already swung way past them and that they are on their way out. Although in recent weeks we've seen a lot of commotion, we've seen the kind of activity, and we've witnessed on social media the expressions of frustrations that we are a bit more accustomed to at this stage in an administration's term. I still think, generally speaking, this government is in it. And for that, they deserve some credit. That suggests that they are doing something right. I don't believe that they have had many notable missteps. We recently had an IMF report that talked about the fact that the country has recovered strongly post the pandemic, post Hurricane Dorian. So, what I would say is that I don't have any bad marks necessarily to give the government overall.
Jasmine, this year, to Rashad's point, they've done a pretty good job of staying on track and dealing with some of the things that have come at them. Nothing has really stuck until recently. And let me ask you, in the reporting and particularly in the public feedback, the events of the past few weeks, have they brought to surface some things that were sitting under the surface that people may not necessarily have talked about, or we're pretty content to let sleeping dogs lie, I guess, in some instances?
I think a lot of the focus over the past year has been on the pockets of people. I mean, when you speak to residents and Bahamians, they care about crime, but most importantly, people care about how far their dollar is going. So a lot of things, I think, as you've mentioned, have been overlooked. But at this point, some of the things that have been happening over the last 2 weeks, 3 weeks cannot be overlooked anymore. So we're talking about corruption more, which has been something Bahamians necessarily have not gravitated to or gravitated in this degree to. So there are some things that are popping up that we cannot ignore and that Bahamians will not ignore at this point.
We saw, for instance, the crime issue, which has been a consistent issue. But now when you mix the pot with police corruption, you have this indictment coming from the U.S. You have police officers who are being held on accusations of drug and weapons trafficking. For me, it pulls back the Band-Aid on a sore that's been sort of lingering with the public for a while with these whispers, I would say.
Exactly. And the government would like to make this out to just be a police issue. They would love to characterize it as, we are kind of like you. We're on the outside, we're looking in, we aim to fix it. But they cannot do it because they have not put in place the mechanisms over the years to ensure that there is accountability in the police force. We, for instance, have written many times about the fact that people would make complaints to the complaints and corruption branch of the police force. 3 months, 6 months, a year go by, they never get a response. Compared to helping to smuggle cocaine, that might not seem to be as significant. But the point is, you don't have the system in place to ensure oversight and to ensure accountability. And so the Bahamian public is not surprised to find out that officers are involved in these extremely serious crimes. And they are right to say that as the government, as our elected officials, you can't escape accountability for this either.
The commissioner's resignation, was it surprising? Did you see it coming?
It was needed, it was necessary, but was it surprising? Yes, because people don't normally, we don't usually hold people to account. And while it should have been done, I feel, as what has transpired, it was surprising because things just get swept under the rug so often. And I think Rashad mentioned we try to poke and prod and ask and ask and ask and ask, and then the response from public officials is, okay, y'all trying to be aggressive, y'all pushing too hard on this, but at the end of the day, we need the answers. And speaking about the Complaints and Corruptions Unit, people file complaints all the time. We don't get answers, and a lot of times people do not get resolutions to those complaints against police officers. So at this point, the question is, can the police police themselves? And I think with what's happening over the last few weeks, that's obviously not an option.
Should this have really, should they have taken more of a proactive approach from the Michael Johnson situation when those voice notes came out? And there was this investigation that's still ongoing, and we're still waiting to get results. But should more action have been taken from then?
Yes, I believe so. For instance, in response to the latest controversy, they've released a bill that would establish this independent commission of investigations. Perhaps that is a step that they should have taken earlier after the Michael Johnson situation. But, I think many people will argue that in itself doesn't even go far enough. And that's the challenge that we have.
That only came after the U.S. indictment, when we had negative publicity across the entire world. So, in fact, if the U.S. indictment did not come out, would that have even, I know they take a while to draft, but would that have been something they tried to get in before the year's end and just weeks after this indictment went public?
Yeah.
On the heels of the indictment, the political landscape has changed in the past 2 weeks as well. We saw the opposition grab the ceremonial mace, the deputy leader, throw it out of the window, creating an entire chaos in the House and downstairs with the crowd gathered, eventually leading to the opposition members being suspended from the House of Assembly for 2 sittings. Necessary or theatrics?
More theatrics than necessary. I think the opposition has several issues in relation to this. First of all, it's very difficult for them to try and hold the microscope up to the present administration because some of them were in Parliament during the last session and they didn't do anything to really advance accountability with respect to law enforcement. So they're not the ideal group of people to be trying to put that kind of focus now. And then the context of the mace being thrown out is also something that's important to look at because, the Speaker did say, I'm going to get to you at some point on the agenda, and that didn't seem to matter. But more than anything else, it lacked the significance of what happened when Sir Lyndon did it. And I think that's going to be its legacy. But having said that, it exposed something about how the Bahamian people feel. Because as I scrolled along social media to gauge people's reactions, there was a lot of people who were for it, and a lot of people who said, this is what you need to be doing on our behalf. So,
do you think it gave the opposition legs with supporters? Do you think it was the kind of action that not just FNM supporters, but Bahamians in general wanted, or was it seen as Rashad said, as just theatrics?
I feel like out there generally the consensus is people want to see action, people want to see things done, and at this point they don't necessarily care how it's done once there is a focus placed. I mean, the protests out there, while they were FNM supporters, there were people, like you said, on social media saying, yeah, we gotta take a stand, but it was theatrical. Was it the right thing at the right time? I do not think so. But at the end of the day, people want to see something happening. There are a group of younger voters who are not necessarily FNM or PLP. They just want to see the country move forward and there be progress and not the same old system or same old thing over and over.
Back and forth.
Yeah.
The back and forth, and you're quite right. Some of this had to do with the Speaker. And Madam Speaker has got into several spots with the opposition. Looking at that, here it is, another public display where it is in full view of our inability sometimes to get things done because there's the constant arguing, the constant back and forth. The Speaker, who is supposed to represent order in the House, is now in a constant battle, it seems, with the opposition.
Yeah, exactly. And while I think we agree that what the FNM did wasn't appropriate, you can understand their frustrations because the Speaker, even from the previous sitting, was really trying to prevent the opposition from speaking on a purely technical matter that nobody cared about. It was entirely within her right and her power to, in the context, allow Michael Pintard to speak and even warn him, because the Prime Minister during that sitting gave a very sober communication, and she could have told Michael Pintard, react in kind, avoid controversial statements that will spark a debate. She didn't go down that road. And it's been a while, in my opinion, that we've had a Speaker who really seemed to aspire to be that fair person who understood that a big part of their responsibility is to ensure that the opposition is allowed to speak.
Jasmine, are people tone deaf to Parliament?
Well, based on the reactions on Facebook and social media, people have tuned out. I would say where we were 10 years ago, if I was covering the House of Assembly and there was a big row and we post that, it would be like thousands of reactions, as opposed to now it'll be maybe a few reactions. So people are not necessarily into the Parliament, and also people just don't understand the process. That's another thing. Like, they don't really teach it in school, but this is what it means, what the opposition is, the governing party. People are just fed up with the talk. I don't know if it's just Parliament.
As a young reporter, really, for me, Parliament was where change took place. It's where the legislation came that affected the laws and policies and procedures and the way we lived and the way things happen. Now, it just seems as if it is a sounding board. The legislation comes, people don't understand it, they don't care about it, it doesn't seem to have relevance to them sometimes, and it's a back and forth, and then the House adjourns and we move on to the next item. Do you think it's lost its importance with the Bahamian people?
Yes, and I'm not entirely sure why, given that it's probably more accessible now than it's ever been. You could listen to it on the radio if you want to. You could find it on Facebook if you want to. But there are times when people tune in, and they tuned in that week, the day after the indictment dropped. There were many people that were paying attention, and what they saw is probably an example of why many don't watch.
Why you don't watch in the first place.
Exactly.
Yes.
The back and forth, the effort to not let both sides speak. So, that's where we are.
Mm-hmm. I would even go even further to say it seems to be a place to push a political agenda, whether for either political party over the last few years. So if I have a affiliation to a particular party and I tune in and I just see one party, like a speaker giving one party all the say, and then my party, I'm upset, and vice versa. Not necessarily this term, but any term is just like my laws, what I see is right. The opposition isn't going to be allowed to speak when they want to speak, even if it's an issue of national importance that we should come together on.
Should this have been one of those occasions where we came together to address this issue?
Yes, but we didn't have any expectation to believe that it would be, given the way the various sides have been playing over the years.
Lowered expectations. Yeah. Amidst all of the drama in the House of Assembly, drama in Parliament and below regarding this indictment and allegations of corruption and drug trafficking, etc., we had another huge story that developed. The JCNP announced a decision to postpone Junkanoo based on a decision handed down by the Attorney General to allow the breakaway group of the Valley Boys, the Way Forward, to participate as an A category group when it was previously announced that that group would be participating as a fun group. JCNP now comes forward and says, we are going to postpone Junkanoo. Of course, prior to this show, there was the announcement made that the parade will go on. But you have now moved into the holy grail of Bahamian society when you're talking about postponing Junkanoo. Should the Attorney General have gotten involved? Should that decision have been handed down, or should the government have just stayed out of it and allow the courts to deal with the matter as it currently is?
I believe that if the Attorney General was going to get involved, one, it's unclear to me why they got involved so late. After the order of entry draw was already established. Yeah. And I also think, given the statements that they put out, they probably should have said what they needed to say privately to the JCNP. If they weren't prepared to stand strong on a position that they have taken publicly to allow both Valley Boys factions to get in, then perhaps press the issue in private and not in public. Because now, the way it looks, it's clear that the JCNP has gotten its way. Mm-hmm. So really, the drama of the past few days seem to be for naught.
Reactions of Bahamians to this story?
Upset, angry. This is not how we want to end our year. We want some competitive fun. There's been these groups, there's sponsors. It was just going to be a big mess if it wasn't solved. And I think like Rashad said, it should have been handled privately because everything happened when that release came out on Sunday night. By Monday morning, the JCNP said what they had to say. They're postponing because at the end of the day, John Canoe is a well-oiled machine. They have systems. It's an organization. They manage the parade. And so why should others be stepping in and making public statements? And why at this point, less than a month before the parade?
And to your point, after the order of entry has happened, you already know who's going where, and there was no indication prior to this. How dangerous is it for a government to get involved with John Canoe?
It's extremely dangerous. we saw what happened on our timelines. People saying, "Oh, the Brave gotta go." This government is already over. But
don't mind the indictment with John Canoe. No,
that was a whole other level of angry.
Do you think, though, particularly in these last two instances, the government has done a good job in responding and in coming to the public and being forthright with what is happening?
I think the way they responded to the John Canoe matter, or the way they handled it, was a kind of rare PR misstep. Usually they've been pretty good at avoiding those kinds of mistakes and irritating the public in that regard. I think when it comes to the indictment, there are different issues from a PR or a superficial perspective. They've done some of the right things. They've acknowledged that this represents a betrayal of the Bahamian Trust. The police commissioner resigned, but in terms of whether they've done anything substantive, I think the jury is out on that.
Jasmine, do you think the people want to see more, particularly when it comes to the indictment and the allegations surrounding it?
I think, especially for that situation, because it has so many ramifications, because now you have to think about these officers and cases they have investigated. So people want to see, perhaps, I don't even know we at this point trust us to investigate ourselves. If you say you're going to bring in an international body, bring it in, and then the same way y'all send out press release that are like well-oiled machines, let us know, send out a report, something that we can actually look at, and also hold a press conference so we can ask the pertinent questions. But don't just sweep it under the rug, because at this point it's not our problem. This is the U.S. government involved, and that's why I really think it really at this point cannot be swept under the rug.
One of the big stories of the year was the rift between the government and the Grand Bahama Port Authority, which in some instances has settled. But how do you think that affected the people of Grand Bahama, who by all accounts have been dealing with all manner of issues, including a stagnant economy, many other issues that have spun off as a result, still in recovery mode from Dorian, still recovering from a decade of hurricanes. How did you think that rift affected the people of Grand Bahama?
I mean, obviously it feels, I'm sure they would feel as if, we already feel like we're dealing with recovering from Monster Storm Dorian. There's so much they have in their economy to try to get back. So when the GBPA and the government, which would be key partners in helping to recover the economy and get Grand Bahama Freeport back on track, obviously they'll be apprehensive. I wouldn't say scared, but just don't want to see something like that. You don't want to see two key partners not get together and help solve this problem. And then it was contentious. It wasn't just, oh, well, we'll just go our way. It was back and forth, like a real public spat.
I think they feel like they are caught between two institutions that they don't entirely trust. On one hand, the Grand Bahama Port Authority, they probably feel isn't doing enough to maintain or upgrade Freeport. On the other hand, many have pointed out the islands, the jurisdictions that are under control of central government, and they continue to, not be in the greatest of shape. But there's also just a lot of uncertainty about where all of this is going. I mean, the government sent that demand letter to the GBPA for $300 million to be paid. We haven't had any updates in regards to that in a while. I believe they went to arbitration. There's this other issue that looks like it's going to be a court matter in terms of who gets to regulate utilities in Grand Bahama. So even amid this huge public spat, there's still a lot of uncertainty in the minds of the Grand Bahama people about where this is heading.
Any other stories that resonated with either of you this year? Things that really stood out to you that you know, when you look back onto 2024, you say, well, that was the story that really stood out to me outside of the past 2 weeks.
I would say the missing American, Taylor Casey. I think that would be one of our first stories of the year where we had an international spotlight put on us. We all got the emails from the international media. In addition to the, I can't remember if that case started today, but the American woman from Alabama with the conspiracy to murder her husband with her two conspirators. I love court, if y'all can't tell, and crime. So those two would stand out for me. And honestly, that Taylor Casey case, based on the family being very public of how they were not happy with that investigation, that besides Michael Johnson, that would have kind of put the spotlight on how are y'all, the police force, gonna handle situations as big as this. And to be honest, the family at this point has no resolution, and we're no closer to finding out what even happened in that case.
So very true. Rashad, anything for you that really resonated?
Well, I think one of the big stories coming into the year was what's going to happen in the F&M in terms of the leadership. Will the issues there be resolved?
That was this year, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was this year.
There was a leadership race in the body, yes.
Indeed. And by a landslide, Michael Pinchard won. We haven't seen the overt signs of conflict that we had seen previously. And so I think moving forward, especially as we look to the next election, that's a significant event from this year that we have to remember.
Most definitely. Well, folks, we're at the end of the segment. Rashad, you're gonna stay with us for a little longer, but Jasmine, we're gonna thank you for hanging out with us. You know, the news cycle is so unpredictable. And in case you didn't know, we had done this show earlier. And we had to come back because so much has happened in such a short time. And people always say to me, you know, how are you doing? How are you keeping up? And I get, well, you just have to keep going. You just have to keep going. It's so unpredictable. It's so dynamic. But thank you for the work that you do in keeping the public informed. I know it's not easy. And there are days you feel like you can't catch your breath because there's so much to do. But I thank you for the work that you do. The Bahamas is certainly a better place for you and for your colleagues. So thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
All right. When we come back, we'll have more on the record. Stay with us. We'll be back right after this.
Looks like Santa appreciates our commitment to bringing you the best, most accurate news of all. Happy holidays from the team you already trust.
America's 47th President Donald J. Trump takes office on January 20th. With a decisive victory and clear mandate from the American people, what will his anticipated policy changes in immigration, taxation, climate change, foreign policy, and social reconstruction mean for the Bahamas and the region? Join On the Record with me, Jerome Sawyer, Thursday, January 23rd at 8 p.m. from the nation's capital for a special Mission to Washington.
And welcome back. We are On the Record. This is our year in review show, one of my favorite shows, probably my favorite show of the year. I'm just gonna stay with that. Well, we're still with Rashad, but we are joined by Ava Turnquest, the Tribune's digital editor. Welcome to the show, Ava.
Thanks for having me.
All right, just so you know, and I want to say this again, we've done the show already. We had to redo this because so much has happened since we shot our original year in review show. But this is completely off topic, but I've got to ask you, just because you are involved with the Tribune's digital side. Here it is. This is an institution that has been built around a newspaper that is now heavily involved in digital. Why is that so important right now in the news cycle to be so involved in that space?
Well, first of all, just from the competitive angle, I mean, all the other players are in this space, and so that's where we need to be. All of our readers, our audience is in this space. But the other side of that is, I think it's really important for the Tribune to be in this space, as we are, as we champion investigative journalism, investigative reporting, and the written word. I think it's still really great for us to be there, because there's so much fake news, blogs, reporting that's sort of faux reporting. It's styled as if it's investigative journalism, but it's really not. So it's really important for the Tribune to be in this space as one of the credible institutions. We fact check. We're doing that background work that you will not see in some of the more immediate places. So that's why it's great. I think traditional newspapers, traditional journalists should definitely continue to push into the digital space, because it creates a higher standard. It ensures that we have some sort of, beyond the competition, that we have some sort of continuous best practices, some journalism best practices.
And you're right, it's for all of us, it's the place where people go to fact check. There is so much fake news, there's so much nonsense, there are so many I don't even know what to call them, but these sites that purport to be, news institutions and
blogs. We could sort of describe them as blogs. And what they do is and I'm pretty sure you are battling this too as well. They just copy and paste the content from your sites, and they maybe add things, change it. So it's really important for us to also, I think media houses should also look into or becoming more involved in regulation.
Yes.
As we get more and more into this, I think almost all of our institutions are now digital. We need to see the regulations now be modernized to be able to provide the protections for the people need that are in this space.
You said a critical word, protections. And that's a big thing we're missing. All right, so let's get to really why we're here, but I couldn't let that opportunity pass. Crime was a big issue and continues to be a big issue this year. And the persistent levels of crime, has it been different this year in terms of the reporting, in terms of how police have been dealing with it? Has anything been different for us this year in that space?
I think in two ways. Different in terms of the reporting. We're seeing more reporting, not just from the police, but more reporting from the public. And I think that's a natural progression as we have, again, the digital space where there are more tools. There's a greater access or an increase in the level of access for all parties. But then also what we're seeing is, I think, a knock-on effect or the culmination of years past. So each year we're seeing a different level of crime. We've seen some years in recent years, or even last year, where we would have had what may have seemed like a reprieve, where the numbers did not escalate or we didn't have a record-breaking year. But then now here we are again, where it looks as if there's still very much a lot of time left in this year, and it's really gruesome to think about. But we are now entering a period where the criminal element is a little bit more active. We do see a lot more activity around this holiday time, when there is more money flowing, more shopping being done. So you have more opportunity for crime. But then also we have to look at our social. It's directly related to our social services. For the last decade, we've identified. We've all done of seeing how the level of need has dramatically increased. Housing is an issue. Access to basic human right, like water, groceries, utilities. All of those things are becoming increasingly hard. And on the backtrack of that is crime. When people cannot feed themselves, when they cannot clothe themselves, they're going to resort to other measures, right? And that's not to excuse it, but then how are we addressing the root issues? We're only going to see it escalate.
Rashad, I have to ask you this now, because, there has been that issue with the economy, with the cost of living, the escalating cost of living. Everything has gone up. There are so many things that we are paying double for in some instances, or if you're like me, just stop buying. But people still have to live. But has the government really, in your estimation, been addressing that effectively? The high cost of living, the cost of everything, and the fact that we can see that there are many more people slipping beyond that or below the poverty line on a consistent basis. We see more people who are in need, who cannot make ends meet. And these people are working. They have jobs.
Yeah. I think even the government would admit that there are some structural issues in relation to our economy that are very difficult to deal with. and the extent to which they are willing to be bold is unclear. One key cost of living area where we have seen this administration make more effort than perhaps what we've seen in the past, it relates to electricity. You know, they have tried to reduce rates for people who make less, and they have embarked on a major reform of Bahamas Power and Light that they say will ultimately reduce the cost of electricity considerably. But otherwise, I cannot think of many initiatives that the administration has pursued that has reduced that cost of living. And I always say, you know, this is the big issue for the Bahamian people, especially when you look at the political consequences.
Very good point. I think right next door in the U.S. presidential election last month, people went to the polls with issues of dollars and cents on their minds, despite everything else that was brought to the table on those issues. Are we going to see that, do you think? Are people, despite everything else that's happening, do you think people are going to become more laser focused on how they're living, the cost of living, the quality of living?
Unfortunately, I think my first reaction to that is, what change has there been? When Bahamians go to the polls this time, will there be a marked difference in campaign, in vision, in strategy or focus? What is the option? You know, are we just hacky-sacking between two political parties who have not substantially restructured or provided anything new to the public? And so when we say, are we going to be more laser focused? Yes, the needs are still going to be there, but we are still sort of pigeonholed between who we're going to elect. And I think we're going to see change is the level of accountability. Bahamians are going to start to demand more. But then what is that vehicle? How are the parties going to respond to that? And will there be national debates? Will there be more transparency on the candidate selection process? Will there be more accountability to the people expected of the candidates who do represent these areas, right? It goes beyond just coming into the House of Assembly. And I think to tie in what has been happening in the House Assembly and sort of the dissonance between actual public reaction is that the Bahamians have not, are by and large, especially our younger voters, there's this apathy there where they're not seeing the actions of what's happening in the House tied to any sort of significant or real change. And so we're asking ourselves, what is the difference? I think that's the question that's going to be
which goes back
in
to
this
the question
election.
I asked in the last segment. Have people sort of become tone deaf to what's happening in Parliament? It seems to me that the public has lost interest in what happens in Parliament because, to your point, it does not translate to everyday life.
I think what Bahamians are most interested in are the deals, are the heads of agreements, are the things that they actually see producing real change, which is foreign investment coming in, new developments being made. That is what sort of gets everyone's attention because that immediately translates into jobs, into money flowing through the economy. And so when we, and that is where the interest in terms of the government's actions or dealings, right? But beyond that, there's no real way to get involved, right? And we don't see the level of transparency that we need to know, if you guys are making these decisions, you're making these deals, how are they the best deals? Are they the best decisions? And then we later find out that, conflict of interest is still such a huge thing. And so the apathy is not coming just because they don't see any real effect. It's also coming because even if I say something, what happens or what changes? So I can find out about it, I can follow along, and I can be invested. But beyond the current political system we have, beyond going out and picketing on Bay Street, what are the other avenues? And I think that is a really big space that's going to change, I think, maybe in this election where you see different groups coming out and doing a lot of education, voter education around how is this democracy actually supposed to work? How do we actively participate? And how does it work for us?
Yeah.
If I'm going to, and it can't just be where I am creating the political legacy of someone and their family. right? It's more than just getting into the house and this grab for power. I think that is what's truly distasteful, and that's why you see this sort of pushback. It's like, I'm hurting, my family's economically, we're all economically depressed, and then we see these major groups who are established and who are quite honestly well off, fighting for power over us who have, or over the majority who have, the economic divide, who have less. And so I see these people who are wealthy, they're elite, and they're fighting with each other on my behalf, and and sort of trying to get me to believe that you, and not literally, but you have gotten fat off the calf, now saying I'm fighting for the rights of the Bahamian people, and the Bahamian people need me to do this. And it's like, it's not coming across as genuine, And
I think you hit the nail on the head. One of the things I want to go back to, though, is, for me, that's concerning, is the loss of trust in the police force and in the justice system, it seems. People particularly, it started, for me, with the Michael Johnson situation and the voice notes that came out and the ensuing investigation. But now here you have officers indicted in the U.S. where they, reference corruption by the Bahamian government. You have now a police commissioner that has resigned in the face of all of this. Where has that eroded the trust even more in the police force, a force that was accused of corruption, in many circles, where there have been inappropriate acts. People have reported, we've seen, through social media, all manner of things, police being hauled before the courts for all manner of cases and for on criminal charges. But in the past few weeks, has that, in your opinion, even further eroded the trust? And to what end? Because if you cannot trust your police force, where does that leave us?
It's brought it to the fore in ways that it's never been before. Like the Bahamian people, I don't think are surprised or too surprised by the allegations. I think trust was already low. A lot of people have had bad experiences with the police, with the attitude. A lot of people are familiar with a system that doesn't work to make them accountable. But now, after all of what has happened, there's this heightened distrust. And there was, on social media, for instance, there were people who said, the audacity of the police to be conducting roadblocks after this indictment came.
I saw some of them, yeah.
So they're watching the police and they're saying, you really out here? Y'all need to, clean it up. That's not good for such a critical institution.
Ava, do you see that as? Do you see the police force facing an even greater challenge next year when they try to enforce? You brought a great example. You conducting roadblocks, but you all accused of this thing. How you gonna stop me? Because my guy ain't licensed. Do you see that impacting the work of the force, even though there's a new commissioner coming in?
I would hasten to say the work of the force has historically been impacted by the lack or the low public trust that they enjoy. And each year, they bring us the statistics and they bring us the, quote unquote, solvency rates. And I also say that what's unfortunate is that this indictment has sort of given us, or given the Bahamian public, a sort of confirmation bias. As in, we already held these suspicions, we already felt like, there was not enough oversight, there was not enough accountability, and there was literally no one that you answer to. And when you have unchecked power, that corrupts, right? There was a reason why we have oversight committees. There's a reason why you cannot investigate yourself. It's not, and there's a reason why the courts talk about the appearance of impartiality. It cannot just be that you are impartial. It cannot just rely on our trust of you. There has to actually be mechanisms. It has to be mechanisms that show that. And I think that what was so unfortunate is that we see that the sort of suspicions that we have weren't just at the ground level of these sort of questionable raids or questionable use of force or sort of questionable reporting. You know, you're making these police statements, and then we see in some cases where what's being reported on the police statement doesn't match up with what the witness testimony and other things. You know, how are we getting these arrests? How are we getting these confessions? Can they actually be tested? But then we see where this allegation of corruption not only is on the ground level with your interactions with day-to-day police, but this is at that highest level of law enforcement. And so what I think it's unfortunate that Commissioner Clayton Fernanda had to resign in this way, but I think that, one, it was too late. Two, that it's not the only resignation that we need. I think if he is to be made to resign in a way to give the appearance of a full and a thorough shake through, then we also need to look at the Royal Bahamas Defense Force, and we also need to look at the government. We need to know that this investigation that would have started in 2021, that covers two administrations.
Sure.
And so to your point that that was brought up earlier, it should not just require collaboration, but there should be a joint commission, there should be a joint task force. If we are truly serious about getting to the bottom of this, and not to say that they want to sweep it under the rug, but not to do just enough so that this space or this dark gray area where this corruption could flourish can continue. If you're serious about chopping off everything, we don't need you to shake the tree. We need you to actually quut it down and then dig up the roots. You know, sometimes you cut off a tree and it will just grow back up,
yeah.
right? Mm-hmm. You need to do something.
Sometimes bigger.
Sometimes bigger. How are you proving to us, or how are you showing to us demonstrably so that you are so dogged about rooting out this corruption that it doesn't we're not interested in people's feelings, people's personalities, people's personal political legacies. Yes, you may not have personally done corruption, but if corruption came about under your watch, then I think it takes a bit of introspection to see, hey, maybe I'm not the best person for this job at this time because I didn't catch it. And now we need to bring in someone who can, right? And I think that is the level of, that's the reaction that Bahamian people expected. It's not something that, we're not surprised that we didn't get it, but that's what we expect, that's what we want. We would like to have something that we can rally behind. We would like to see both leaders, the opposition and the government, come together and say, hey, this is something that is so serious that we can't be concerned about the next 3 years.
And to that point, as opposed to coming together, it crescendoed in a huge, dramatic display in the House of Assembly a few days ago with the mace being thrown.
It was like Christmas for the FNM. You know, I mean, what was the statements up until this point? It's almost as if this fell into their lap and now they have another 3 months of fodder. We need more than that. We need to actually say, if you truly believe that the Davis administration cannot be trusted with this, what is your next steps? Because if it is that serious and you're not just grandstanding, there are actionable steps that can be taken. And that is what I think where we're at as a society. And that's where the sort of apathy comes in. Because if you're just trying to get me to, shuck and jive to get me to vote for you again, we're not voting again for another 2 or 3 years. So you could come at me then. If you were actually trying to produce change right now within the political system that we have, and if you're not saying that we should riot and burn it all down to the ground, because that's another way of doing things too as well, right? If you're saying that we're going to work within this system, then work within the system and actually show us a way forward. But to just capitalize on a weak, an administration that has honestly seen so many scandals, and I'm not even to say scandals, so many controversies, right? That some of which, if there was true accountability and maybe freedom of information, may not have blossomed or bloomed to what they did, right? But I think right now, the apathy is truly based out of I'm only good for my vote, right? And my vote isn't for another 2 years or 18 months. So this isn't even the start of silly season, right? And if we're gonna expect to see this level of bluster for the next 2 years, we're exhausted.
Is the answer still the Freedom of Information Act?
The start of it is.
Well, the thing about it is the administration, they've released this bill, this independent investigations commissions bill, and they say they are going to give this commission vast power in terms of the ability to investigate law enforcement. The problem and the reason why the public won't trust this is because there's no history of this kind of thing working in the country.
Where's the precedence?
They've laid no groundwork for us to believe it.
We can't go back to Commission
Exactly.
Because, yeah.
We don't have a fully implemented Freedom of Information Act. And in every other area where we have asked for you to increase oversight and accountability of powerful officials in this country, they've failed to do anything. And here we are from this conflict, this significant moment that has tarnished the public's reputation. That's when you present this bill. But we have never seen in the history of the country an institution like this be given the independence and the resources that it needs to operate the way the public demands.
Do you think this is just window dressing?
Well, it's the window dressing on the window that the mace got thrown out of, right? So how effective is that even? You know, it's window dressing for that place, you know? And I think it's more than just an intention. And it goes back to, you know, the Prime Minister made a really strong statement. This is a betrayal of trust. But then after you acknowledge it, what happens? And on the other side, with the opposition leader, he's saying that this is unacceptable and they're not being treated fairly and this is the Bahamians' voice that are being silenced, there's no transparency. So on the other side of that, there are actions, right? Has the FNM been reading up, does the FNM have a counter proposal to this? Does the FNM have a strategy? And if the strategy is just, oh, we need to go to some big elite foreign country and they're gonna be the ones that are gonna be the standard or validate with our, that's not the answer either. We're a sovereign country. And if you're throwing the baby out with the bathwater, then how are we gonna how are we gonna move forward?
How are we gonna recover?
How are we gonna recover?
Which raises another question for me, another concern. I would say we have a new administration getting ready to take office in January, with President-elect Trump, who has a particular view of countries like ours embroiled in these kinds of things. From where I sit, that's an area of concern. We have already seen Prime Minister push back on a request to accept deportation flights. But, you know, should we really be very concerned with actions to be taken by that new administration and how that is going to affect our relationship with our nearest neighbor, biggest trading partner, closest partner, brand new administration, and he has a very firm view on some things that really affect us?
I think perhaps for the first time in a while, we are looking at a situation where we can be significantly impacted by decisions that they make. We know that Donald Trump has certain views as relates to immigration. He's talked about, for instance, wanting to end the anchor babies policy in the United States. That would have ramifications for us. We don't know how far he's going to go in terms of trying to deport undocumented immigrants, but that could have an impact on us. You know, the Prime Minister has made climate change very much the centerpiece of his agenda, certainly when he is abroad. Will the Davis administration soften their rhetoric on this, given the fact that the approaching American administration doesn't share those views? So there's a lot for us to watch in that arena, I feel.
Yeah, and I also think just in terms of the political sort of influence, right? So we're seeing America swing so hard right, and you know that always has a sort of a counter swing for us here at home. Does that? I know that you know the opposition is hoping that that means that it's also going to swing for them as well. However, I think it's important now to sort of draw that line in the sand for both the government and the opposition to say, where are we going to make our stand? What's the hill that we're going to sort of rest on for sovereignty reasons? We're so economically tied to the U.S. So yes, if Trump is great for the economy, that's great for us too. However, we are so fragile in terms of our social services net, sort of what our economy is doing right now. So if we face any serious repercussions for what happened or the allegations that are coming out of our airport, that's, you know, Trump has also made it quite clearly, Americans first, Americans first. And so this seems like, you know, a space that he can move in to show that he's decisive and is shoring up America's borders.
I'll tell you what worries me. And again, these are just allegations in this indictment, but the fact that these drugs are being trafficked through the airport, and police plane allegedly was involved. People at the highest ranking level of the force are involved. That has implications, and for me, frightening implications, particularly in a country where we have a well-established U.S. pre-clearance. There's been said, there's been no decision. But
there has been no decision.
Yeah.
He hasn't taken office yet. But that does not mean that there has not been they're not considering or looking at this.
Mm-hmm.
And I think our actions, even now, what have we done to shore up? I would have hoped that this administration would, or not this administration, but as maybe perhaps one of the first pronouncements of our new commissioner of police will be in the announcement of an intense, multi-layered investigation into the indictment, into the claims that have come out of the indictment, because we don't have to wait for that indictment to carry on to get that information.
For sure.
We don't have to actually wait for them to tell us who the politician is. What are our investigators doing? What are we doing here at home? Have we started to look into these claims? Have we done a thorough overhaul of the airport security infrastructure? What have been the sort of response beyond the political response?
And the former Prime Minister, Dr. Hibben-Minnis, does make a good point when he says the fact that our officials were so unaware that this indictment was coming, they were so oblivious to the investigation, suggests that the U.S. have a certain degree of distrust for our authorities.
I'll tell you why that's worrying to me. To your point, that there is that distrust. But it does raise the question, did in fact someone know? Silence is definitely there. It is a very valid point.
I think that there's two ways. There's no way that we can have allegations this strong and there is no sort of correspondence, no sort of ask for help from the actual country that this is happening in, right? One. And I know that maybe that's not common in this type of investigation because of the nature of the investigation. However, Davis has said that repeatedly he spoke with the U.S. about his concern over specifically cocaine trafficking. So you're telling your partner that, hey, this level or this increase in interdictions that we're seeing is really concerning and worrying. What's happening here? And they're not saying anything. They're not saying, oh, well, we are looking into it. They don't have to give you details, but to say that you are completely unaware means that, and then what was said in the indictment, that someone had told the DEA agent that this person was untouchable.
That was probably the most worrying,
shocking
line.
Because it's so blatant.
Yes.
What do you think that after telling, so me and you and the DEA agent, right?
Yeah.
I'm saying, oh no, you can't look at the person. He's untouchable. What do you think the DEA agent is going to do? He's going to go and I'm not also corrupt. Unless he thought he was talking to a corrupt DEA, you tell a DEA that this person is untouchable in the Bahamas, then that gives me the position to think, okay, there are people that are untouchable in the Bahamas, so I cannot involve the Bahamian government in my investigation because
or the Bahamian authorities,
because people, they believe that there are people who are untouchable. There must have been something that must have given them that belief that beyond this anecdotal report that someone is untouchable. Because a junior police could say that to someone, and I don't have to take that as a state official. So how that was described makes me think that, and we have to look at this long storied relationship with OPBAT, the level of betrayal of the OPBAT agreement perhaps is what prompted them not to go down the route of telling anyone what happened. Because we have this 20-year agreement with you, and you've been leading us by the nose the entire time.
Which, to be honest, and to give historical context, the OPBAT and the OPBAT agreement and these operations were the result of a similar situation in the 80s when similar allegations came up against the then government, which was all precipitated by an NBC report, Nation for Sale, which then resulted in an entire commission of inquiry where individuals were named, where a lot of allegations were made, there was a lot of evidence for it, but nothing happened. And so here we are, like you say, the betrayal of this relationship that was seemingly put in place to deal with this issue and to stop this corruption and to keep an eye on these things. But here it is, we find ourselves in some ways right back where we were in the 80s.
And where did that money go? Did it go into the Bahamian economy? Is it sitting in the banks? I mean, anyone can say that has to deal with the banks in 2024 knows that KYC that they put us through is relentless. So where is it? Is there a mattress with 1.2 million just stuffed into it?
I'd like to know.
How have all of these institutions failed to pick up on this?
Yes.
Why did it take us busting? Why did it take? I know these are just allegations, but why did it take them this long? It makes me think that there was so much that they had to wade through in order to get to these individuals, right?
Yeah.
And we have to look at that. How are our systems working to protect corruption rather than expose it?
And that's a good point. So all of this now as we get ready to go into 2025. We still have a couple of weeks to go until the new year, and already we are well into reporting into 2025. So as we prepare to wrap up, I guess my final question to both of you is, what are some of the things that you're really going to be keeping your eye on in the new year? Rashad, I'll start with you.
Well, I'm going to be keeping my eye on the resolution of this Michael Johnson matter. Particularly given what we've seen with the indictment, particularly given the heightened scrutiny, I'm very curious to see how the police handle that in various perspectives. We know that the FBI has been involved, reportedly. The UK National Crime Agency, what degree of transparency are we going to see in terms of, for instance, a report? I think when you talk about building trust, that's going to be a critical thing to look forward to.
I think for me, in our last iteration, I said the police, and then the allegations. However, that's come to the fore as we can see, and we will continue to watch that. But I think something that may not be on our radar that we perhaps should look to is social services, the housing crisis. That we've been calling it a crisis now effectively for more than a year. Where is that solution coming from, and what is the impact of having been a year-long crisis now? We have Bahamians on multiple family islands. As these family islands try to get off the ground and have their own independent economies, there's a persistent need for housing. But here in the capital, where the majority of people are so densely packed, what is that impact? And then also on the social aspect of it, really taking putting that scrutiny on social services and the people that they're supposed to be helping, because we just had that really unfortunate situation with the last two sort of grisly murders that really shocked us, Adriel Moxie and then the elderly lady Vernensha. Both of those stem from a social services issue, where we have on the one hand the suspect, I think he may have been charged in the case of the elderly woman. He was described as this drug addict vagrant who was mentally unwell. That's a social services issue.
And allowed to just roll.
And then on the side of Adriel Moxie, they said that they made 2 interventions before. That is a structural issue, and if there is one Adriel Moxie, then there are thousands.
That's right.
Based on what we know about the stats. And so I think that's something where we have to turn a laser focus to, because that's the impact. We are doing a really good job reporting on what's going on, but how is it impacting the people and bringing that to the fore? Because that's what's important.
Down, or the spillover. Folks, thank you very much. I want to thank you for coming on and having this discussion. And I promise, as I'm sitting here, I'm like, 2025, I got to bring y'all back. We got to talk about some more things. You just can't wait until the end of the year to have these discussions, because I think we're going to be in for a very active news cycle.
It appears to be. It seems like we'll definitely be off to the races a lot earlier.
So enjoy your Christmas. It's going to be a rough one. So thank you again. Continue to do the great work that you do.
Thank you for having us.
The Bahamian people are much better for the work that journalists do in this country. We have an obligation, and we certainly appreciate the work that you do.
Oh, thank you.
Thank
you for having us.
And thank you for coming. Well, we promise this is the last show. We attempted this before we had to come back to the studio based on everything that has happened. But what a season it has been. And tonight's discussion was a fitting way to close it out. The last 2 weeks have brought some of the most dramatic and impactful stories we've seen all year. These headlines reflect not just challenges, but also the complexities of who we are as a nation. A special thank you to our guest tonight. And all season, we appreciate you for imparting the knowledge that you have onto us this season. We appreciate you. As we take this brief break to prepare for another season, we promise to return with the same dedication to truth, integrity, and the stories that really matter to you. Until we meet again in the new year, I'm Jerome Sawyer, and thank you for watching On the Record.